Hello, everybody, and welcome to Collateral Global Podcasts. I'm Toby Green, and I'm a member of the Scientific Advisory Board at Collateral Global, and I'm really pleased today to be talking with Clifton Duncan. Clifton, hello and welcome.
Hello, Toby. Good to see you again.
Yeah, nice to see you again. And well, we're going to be talking, because we've been in contact for a while, and we're going to be talking about the impacts of the last 2 years on something which, of course, is so close to your heart, and you've written quite a lot about on Twitter and discussed, which is, the arts, theatre, which was your life until all this happened, and of course, one of the things which is called a collateral harm of the pandemic, but is such a devastating loss for so many artists, actors, people involved in theatre, has been, the impact that all of this has had on theatre. So maybe you could start by just sort of introducing yourself a bit to our listeners and viewers, and your perspective and expertise on this.
Yeah. So, my name is Clifton. I'm what's called a classically trained professional actor. I did my first play when I was 16. It was played Hugo, I think, in Bye Bye Birdie, and I chased some girl into a drama class in high school. That's how like most straight guys get into theater in the first place. They're always chasing some girl. But I just found I had an aptitude for it. I was never one of those kids who saw a production of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat when I was 6 and said, I have to do this for the rest of my life. But I was always kind of an artsy fartsy kid. I was mainly going to be an illustrator for a long time. Okay. And I dabbled into music and poetry and short fiction and those kinds of things. And then once I hit mid to late adolescence, just the idea of being an actor kind of popped into my head, which is like the worst way to become an actor, really, because really it's such a difficult profession in life. But I ended up going to Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, and got a useless undergraduate degree in the theater. But while I was there, I got
probably had a good time.
Well, I was so confused at that time, and I really was just coasting on momentum because I kept getting cast in shows, and I got a lot of encouragement at a very vulnerable time in my life, that if I were to keep going, that I would be pretty successful, which is ironic now because this is sort of beside the point of what we're talking about, but there's so much now in the industry that there's this trend that swept over it, that along with COVID, I think will do like a 1-2 punch and knock it out on its ass. But now it wants to be an anti-racist industry. And I'm thinking to myself, I've never been excluded. I've never felt unwelcome or discriminated against in the entire time that I've been an actor, which, began in the late 90s. But I got out of undergrad and was farting around in Washington, D.C. for a little bit. And, I was couch crashing and sleeping in my car every now and again, and just building up a community. And I learned that I said, I'm okay at what I do, but I think I could probably be better. And so I put all of my eggs into one basket, and I auditioned for and kind of sailed into New York University's graduate acting program, which is a subsidiary of the Tisch School. And it's one of the big 3 conservatories, the other 2 being the Yale School of Drama, aka the Jail School of Trauma, and the Juilliard School, aka Jail Yard. And say what?
I said, okay, yeah. I like your acronyms.
It's once you get into these kind of circles, we all have these kind of competing ideologies, we have these little small friendly competitions. But I guess it's sort of the equivalent of a RADA or something like that in the UK. And it's one of those programs where they audition like 1,000 prospective students. They call back 50, then they offer spots to 18, and I was able to get in there. And I spent, I graduated right in the middle of the Great Recession of 2009, after the housing boom and bust. And you couldn't buy a job, but even then, I just, for almost the next decade or so, I did supporting and lead roles in many of the nation of America's great theaters. And eventually, my representative said, you please stay in New York. Please, God, stay in New York." And
Okay.
so eventually I started getting work off Broadway, and then around 2017 or so, things began to really pay off. And I made my Broadway debut. I made a few standout performances at large venues, such as particularly the City Center in New
Hmm.
York City, which is a block away from Carnegie Hall.
Hmm.
And I did a play called, you may have seen this show, called The Play That Goes Wrong.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's on in the London West End as well. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So J.J. Abrams, I think he saw it in the West End, and he said he wanted to produce it. So he brought the original cast and creators over, and they did the show on Broadway for 6 months, and then they brought in the American cast to do the Broadway show, and we did. So I was a part of the first
Okay.
American cast to do The Play That Goes Wrong. And I had to leave the show after about 6 months due to injury, because I don't know if you've seen the show, but it's very stunt heavy. It's
Okay.
lots of slapstick humor, and very, very physical. But I ended up leaving the show, and then my career off Broadway began to take off, and I got involved with a couple of shows that were going to move to Broadway. And I began to receive awards recognition, and then the work in the theater kind of dried up a bit. But then I moved on into television, which I'd been trying to break into for years and years and years. That's where the money is, and that's how you pay off your
Right.
student loans,
Right.
And so I guest starred on 3 of our 4 major broadcast networks, and I began making a living just off of television residuals and doing the odd workshop, a play workshop, or or concerts around New York. So I was establishing myself as an acting singer of note, or singing actor of
Okay.
note, in New
And
York
those
City,
those
which is
and
in
those
Harlem.
residuals are one of the best things for actors, aren't they? From what I know,
Well, yeah, well, that it's because so typically what you do in New York is that when you're not working, you are on the dole. Essentially, you're taking unemployment insurance, and I stopped taking unemployment insurance, like deliberately so. Because just as a principled thing, I said, well, it will force me to have to find some other way to make a living. And, so those residuals kind of became my unemployment insurance in a way. So, they really helped me out during some tough times. And, so you're able to, the trick is that you're really not acting as much for a living. You're really searching for acting jobs. I was able to sustain myself finally after all this time working. And, typically, I think what a lot of people don't understand about an acting career or an acting job, it only takes one job to make you. And but oftentimes, it takes like a decade or so for you to build up the kind of relationships, to build up the kind of competence and confidence in what you can do, to get to a point where you have established a network and a reputation where you have people who begin to find shows for you. But I was always a huge fan of Broadway. I sometimes joke that I was born 50 years too late, because a lot of my biggest influences were the Alfred Drakes and Richard Kielys of the past. These big, or John Raitt, these big Broadway baritone leading men, which is how I saw myself coming up in that mold. And on top of that, I was a big fan of the Laurence Oliviers and the Michael Redgraves, your compatriots. So those big sort of bravura, John Gielgud, just that old school of we're going to be these Shakespearean actors, even though later in his career, Olivier did some really, really wonderful work on film. But
as you say, it's the baritone voice, I guess, which links both those in a way.
I suppose so. But so I just the point is that even though I wasn't really a theater kid, I still have a great respect for that tradition, and I think that selfishly speaking, I've always wanted some way for theater to have a more of a cultural relevance, the way that I perceive that it does, in the UK. Hopefully someday in America it can we can reach a point again where you can hear a song on Broadway, but also hear it on the radio or something like that.
I mean, do you mean something like Bertolt Brecht, not politically perhaps, but in terms of Bertolt Brecht as theatre as a kind of transformative project in itself? Is that the kind of thing you have in mind?
No, I just think that, Brecht is a bit, I will say I did do a Brecht show off Broadway that really, really took off. And it was really astounding to see like the one theater that it was called the Foundry Theater that produced it. And they do a lot of work with the community and like homeless shelters. So for our opening night, they brought in people from, their shelter. And, these people don't go to see theater, much less, to see Brecht. And they were so swept away by what we did. And we also saw high school kids also swept away by Brecht. So it's like, when you don't have to quote unquote update or massage these works, if you do them with thought and with skill and with panache, they really can resonate with people. But I just sort of how Tin Pan Alley back in the mid 20th century, you could hear a Cole Porter song on Broadway and also it would be popular on the radio. It became a standard. Hamilton kind of came close to that. Yeah. But it doesn't have the same relevance that it used to. But the broader point is that nothing was ever handed to me, even though my success was assured. It took a while, but it really began to blossom. And so heading into 2020, I'm not saying that I was living life on easy street, but me and my team, as they call it, we were all convinced, like, just hang on, you're one job away. You came so close to all these other things. The momentum is going in the right direction. Just hold on. And, at this point I started, you get to the point where you want to be as an actor is where you don't have to audition as much, if at all, where people are beginning to offer you things, offer you jobs and roles. And so I've been offered a couple of great things, one in particular that would have really helped me out in my career. Unfortunately, a pandemic happened and our governments, particularly our local government at the state and local level in New York City, or as I call it now, the city formerly known as New York, completely just reacted hysterically, and they've murdered it.
This is really. I think it's important to just take stock of the story you just told, Clifton. I mean, you telling the story, which I guess is the story of most actors. It's. I think we all get a sense of it's a tough career. You've got to really fight. But, it's from what you're saying, like a 20-year fight or work, or, maybe that's the wrong word, but working unbelievably hard in very many ways for a long time with times of slack where you're on unemployment. And then that's what it takes, I guess, from what you're saying to get a successful career in acting. Is that a fair summary?
There was it's a war of attrition. There was a British actor, I wish I could remember what his name was, but apparently he said sooner or later, all of your competition just dies. And, and it really is about the tenacity, because it's so soul crushing so much of the time that that there's a phrase, nice work if you can get it. Yeah, it is nice work if you can get it, and every job you get is a miracle. And I'm proud to say that I was able to work quite a bit as an actor, and I even though I'm not a household name, obviously, I still pound for pound worked a lot more than most actors are able to, and I built up a portfolio of a diverse body of roles and work that I'm very, very proud of, and I hope to continue. I call myself a character actor in a leading man's shell, who just, from Shakespeare, musical comedy, modern plays, modern drama. I was able to do a lot of it, and I'm not someone who really talks about myself all that much or the work that I do, but I think just to provide context and credibility for what we're talking about. It helps.
And so you took us up to the pandemic and its beginning, and when it started, then so there must be a lot of people in a similar situation to the one you described for yourself. Obviously there was this panic and hysteria, but at the same time, as you say, the political decisions that were being taken in the city of New York were ones which were clearly going to have long-term implications for the world of theatre and for the struggles which you've described for so many people. So, I mean, could you just tell us a little bit about, did people discuss that at the time? Were there any people sort of worried? Well, people must have been worried, but were there any concerns about what the long-term implications of this might be?
No. I mean, that's a strange thing. For one, ironically, I was someone who was ahead of the curve in terms of recognizing the pandemic. And as a matter of fact, I remember one of the commentators I listened to said, you should probably stock up and prepare now, because even though the virus does not appear to be that bad, but the response to it is what we should be concerned about. Lord, how prophetic that turned out to be.
Wow. Yeah.
But through January through March of 2020, I was masking and gloving in public. I was isolating when I could. I was stocking up on food and supplies. And at that point, people were saying, it's just the flu, brah. And it was weird because it was Republicans in our country, which is broadly speaking the right wing. The right-wing party in the United States, they were the ones who initially were warning, and someone made this claim, so I checked on it myself. This is why I know the dates on it. January 26th, 6th, I'm speaking with distinction, Republican Senator Tom Cotton raised the alarms about something happening in China. On January 28th, soon after former President Trump's State of the Union address, he mentioned, it's sort of in passing that something was happening in China. Then the night after, another Fox News commentator, Greg Gutfeld, talked about something happening in China as well. And then what you saw at the same time were all of these left-wing news outlets. There's a collage floating out there that you can still find probably that just played down the threat of the virus, which, in hindsight is kind of incredible when you consider how they've gone completely 180 degrees in the opposite direction, where now it's complete nonstop balls to the wall fear porn. So, and the United States is very, very strange. I'm not sure how it is in the UK, but the political polarization is such that now you had a point where you found people who were more independent-minded or heterodox-minded or on the right, pretty much, who were the first people to say, wait a minute, something's going on. And, and to be fair, Donald Trump, his unification was not his strong suit. And his initial sort of blasé approach to the virus obviously did him no favors. But it was the more conservative, I guess, wing of the political spectrum that was sounding the alarms about this, while the more left wing, the New York City's mayor, Bill de Blasio, for instance, as late as March 15th, was tweeting about, go to the movies and, take the subway and hang out. I recommend this movie. He's such a doofus. I can't believe he was elected, but now he's been replaced by someone who's potentially even worse. But so all that said, initially the response was very sort of blasé. There was an usher in early March who tested positive for COVID, and the shows were still going to go on. And I was this lone voice who was saying, "You're putting lives at risk." The very same things you hear now, and and it was very much downplayed. But then things took a turn where
So I was going to say, so when did that happen? Because just
the
reflecting
first
on what you said, obviously. Just to say, because I imagine, I may be wrong, but I imagine the Broadway and the theatre in general in New York is pretty much a Democrat game, basically. And so presumably people, at some point, there must have been a move from a sense of, this is nothing to worry about, because from what you're saying, it was the Republicans who were more sounding the alarm bells to start with, to a sort of mass movement in the opposite direction and panic. And so did you see that happen? What happened?
Well, I think part of what happened is that, and as you were saying, yes, the arts in general, the theater in particular, New York City is a very, very heavily Democratic, or as we say, blue city. And the arts and the theater, and in particular, even more so than Hollywood, in my estimation, is a very, very left-leaning blue institution. And I think what began to happen is that the hatred and the vitriol against Donald Trump, who, I mean, as we all know, is a very, very polarizing figure, um, I think it became useful as a political wedge to use against him, because 2020 obviously was a presidential election year.
Right.
And in early March, that was, I think it was like somewhere around March 1st, the first case of corona, of COVID was announced and was found. And then after that, that's when the whole idea of 2 weeks to slow the spread, sort of began to emerge. Our governor at the time, the now disgraced Andrew Cuomo, who, perhaps we can get into later, he shut things down, and he was very gung-ho about it. And it was funny because initially I said, begrudgingly, I said that it's too late, but at least he's doing something. But what began to happen, I noticed, and my timeline is fuzzy on this, but our union, Actors Equity Association, and I know the UK also has equity over there.
Yeah.
They began to send out these emails and surveys about basically surrounding vaccines, but there was a very strong push early on to say that we can basically only get back to normal. The show must go on is now an outdated and archaic and obsolete phrase, which was offensive to me, because if you're someone who's in the city of New York, which is a tough place to live, and you're in the theater, which you only do for the love, the Stella Adler, one of our most revered acting teachers, once boasted that she never even got a headache. So our health and wellness and our strength and tenacity to push through, and no matter what, the show must go on. You have to go on because you have an obligation to the audience and to your fellow performers. Early on, our union began to say, we can't do things like that anymore. And there was this push to never go back to the old normal. And for me, I'm like, well, okay, it's bad, but probably around April or May, I began to say, well, we can't live like this forever. We can't shut everything down forever. And from the beginning, I was sort of perturbed because, and people have pushed back on me about this, but I think it's true. The arts are essential jobs in New York City. The arts economy, especially Broadway. So if you go to Lower Manhattan in the theater district in the 40s, about 42nd Street to 50th on the west side, that's where the theater district is. And it's not just all these Broadway theaters, all these Broadway marquees. It's all the restaurants, they're around surrounding it, the bars surrounding it that actors go to before and after shows to hang out, where patrons go to before and after shows to hang out. It's little bodegas, the little delis, the souvenir shops that people visit, all that foot traffic, all the tourists go to go see all these, to get all this activity. And then just people working at the theaters themselves. It's not just the actors or the backstage crew. It's the custodians who manage the upkeep on these old buildings, these old theaters. It's the security personnel who keeps the all the staff on the inside safe. You have couriers and messengers who deliver mail to backstage to people. You have the ushers, who are often retirees, who love theater and want to see shows, or they're very young people who just moved to the city, and they're trying to get their foot in the door and
find a way in,
and trying to get in there, or they're working concessions, or they're bartending. I mean, I was a snack vendor for a long time, and I sold merchandise for shows. So there's an entire ecosystem that. Economic ecosystem that people.
So this is very important, because it's not just people like you who'd spent 20 years working hard and finally we're beginning to reap some fruits, but also, as you say, young people just trying to get a foot in the door, it's not wrong to call it a theatre of dreams, where people are trying to find their way through, as well as, of course, as you say, the whole economic ecosystem around that in hospitality and all of that is affected. So as you say, this is, for New York, it's an essential part of life. So
I think so.
how did theatres and actors in particular, and set designers and costume designers and all the people associated, was it simply the question of this incredibly divided country politically through the Trump years, which of course we've seen in the UK as well with Brexit and all of that, and this polarization that meant that people in the industry were just willing to, as you say, kind of turn the page on the long-standing industry ethos of the show must go on? Is that what it was, or how else would you explain it otherwise?
Well, it's very complex. I think on one hand, because people like me, when you mention terms like the economy, or you talk about economics, right away you meet this wall of resistance from people who have no understanding of what an economy is, or how an economy functions, or what economics even is. And on top of that, these kinds of subjects are considered more right-wing. You only hear Republicans talking about, the economy or taxes or whatever. And so right away you saw people say, well, what do you mean the economy? That's not important. It's, what you're talking about, making profit and Wall Street fat cats. These are people who are incapable largely of grasping the broader spectrum of issues, because the economy is comprised of people and their own personal interests, and they don't understand this kind of thing. And when you have this anti-Republican or anti-right-wing hate machine that's been churning for years and years and years, and which grew more intense during the Trump years, and again during an election year, it was especially bad. But I think there was one real standout moment for me where I began to say something is really, really wrong. There was an actor named Chad Kimball, who Tony-nominated actor. I think the most recent thing he did was a show called Come From Away. And he's a devoutly conservative Christian, one of the rare openly conservative Christian actors, who works on Broadway. And his governor, I think he was in Washington, Washington State, forbid people from singing in church. And Chad was not very happy about this. And he tweeted something about, I will not let my government prevent me from singing, or in worship of my Lord. And Broadway Twitter just completely lost their minds at this point. And, there were people who were saying, like, dude, there's a pandemic going on. It's super dangerous. And people were saying, I don't even want to share a rehearsal. I hope I never have to share a rehearsal room with you. And then I weighed in and say, yes, he's correct. He's talking about government overreach, which I thought, we on the left understood. We were protesting it during the Bush years. Then what happened? And again, when you mention issues of the economy, again, these people who, they're very feeling individuals, they're artists, they're very sensitive. They also have this sort of idea of themselves as uniquely compassionate and uniquely empathetic about the needs of the aggrieved or the oppressed or whatever. They take as axiomatic that they're the only people who care about doing no harm to others. They're the only people who care about preserving life. And they never expose themselves to any diversity of ideas or range of thought and opinion. And I was trying to get through to people and say, hey, it's not just us, guys. It's not just us. There's an entire sort of ecosystem. It's not just about profit. It's not just about money. It's not about the stock market. We're also talking about something that's central to the identity of New York City, which is one of the arts meccas of the world. And you're allowing, you talk about how you rage against the machine and how you are, pushing back against these oppressive systems, but yet you're letting these government officials dictate to you whether or not you are essential or not. At the same time, these liquor stores get to stay open. So what sense does it make that people can still go and buy whiskey and wine, but they can't go and see a Broadway show? Are you going to tell me that that booze is more essential to our health than going to see a Broadway show?
The catharsis of theater. Yeah.
And it's the spiritual nourishment. It's it's the complete sort of abdication of your responsibility, or or your, what's the word I'm looking for? Your, I guess your duty, or whatever your gifts are as
Your
an
calling,
artist.
your calling as a theater.
But it's not just about us, it's about our audience, and especially even now, where they're excluding people from coming to the theater based on their medical decisions. We've been beaten up for over 2 years now, and now you're not allowing people to have that kind of catharsis, to have that kind of release, to have that kind of nourishment of the soul that only art can provide. And so there's just and it's funny because ironically now people like me are deemed selfish because I say, well, we shouldn't be so devoted to I don't think we should have to wear masks all the time. This seems kind of weird. And there was obviously a huge push early on, pushback, because people were so afraid and so convinced that if they were outside or in the wrong place at the wrong time, if they inhaled, they were going to die. And I think when people saw the sort of opprobrium that people like Chad Kimball received, and on top of all of that, so there's this idea that your reputation is very, very important. And
I guess that must be a factor, unwilling, if there's a kind of groupthink developing in as you say, in a highly competitive field, who wants to step outside that,
Right. So your reputation is extremely important. I mean, I've been contacted by directors via the phone and say, hey, I saw you worked with this actor before, and they were fired from this job. Can you tell me what happened? Because I want to hire this actor. I want to figure out what's going on. So people talk. It's a very relationship-centric profession. Actors are expected to be highly compliant, and really, unless you're a star, you don't have much leverage, which is what makes a lot of these onerous sort of policies even more egregious. So we don't really have that much leverage because, sure, you can turn down work. They will find somebody who will play the part if you don't want to play it. So there's all of these sort of social factors that creep into people's unwillingness to say anything, even though privately they agree with me. They don't want to have...
just to pick you up on that, Clifton. So obviously you didn't follow the curve, and you did speak out. And from what we've talked, you've moved away from New York for the time being. So what you say, people are contacting you sort of back channels, saying they agree with you, but they can't speak in public. I mean, how's that experience for you been, moving into this kind of semi-detached relationship from what you love?
So I can't go back and look at, for instance, playbill.com, which is like a theater trade website, or broadwayworld.com. I can't look at these websites anymore because it churns up a lot of feelings of anger, resentment, despair. Like the contrast between what my life was like, say, in 2018. I mean, there was a billboard with my picture on it in the center of, right in the middle of Times Square. Right. In 2018, and now it's this, and life goes on. You see everything churning on without you, and it seems nobody cares. So it's just, I don't have the. I mean, I have to confess, I don't think I really have the fortitude to just see all of that. No. And it makes me say, like, oh, did I make the wrong decision? But there's also a huge frustration because I see people who agree with me, and yet they keep their mouth shut and their heads down, and they say, well, I have a family to feed, or I want to keep on working, which to me says that, they're prioritizing their own well-being for the sake of themselves, and they know this is wrong. They know that what's going on is bad policy, and that it's gonna have damage. And I see these people, like tap dancing in public, and they make these public social media posts where they're talking about how happy, the work that they're doing, with the work they're doing, and they enjoy their castmates. And we might be able to get into later, like some of how this ridiculous COVID policies are affecting just rehearsal and performance. But yet privately, they're like, I hate these people. They're COVID crazy, and I don't want to deal with this. And you hear stories of actors who are faking their vaccination status just so they can continue working, which to me is almost worse, because that if you're faking it, that this is wrong and it's not right, and yet you're still acquiescing to this system. So there's the frustration that people are just cowards, and they're not saying anything, and so people like me, I don't know if I'm blacklisted. I will say I'm thankful for my management team. I have friends who were dropped by the representatives because they refused to take the COVID injection, and my own manager, they haven't been as aggressive or bullish about it, but they've said straight up, I can't submit you for anything anymore, which means I can't audition for anything anymore, which means I can't work. So there is a lot of frustration, and I don't know how the industry bounces back or recovers from a lot of this.
Let's talk a little bit about what the impacts are on the industry. You were talking there. Perhaps we can come in a moment to what you were just referring to about the impact of the masks and the situation in New York in terms of mandates. And obviously, as we know, New York is a city where a lot of the people who haven't taken the COVID vaccine are from minority communities. So there must be all kinds of impacts that this is having in terms of theatre relationships. Why don't we start with that? What are? Have you heard about what this is meaning for audience relationships with actors and for the industry?
Well, now here's what's very strange about this, because, and why this is so. I don't know if I can swear. Maybe I'll use a British swear, yeah. But it's so bloody ridiculous and absurd. So right now, in addition to COVIDianism, as I call it, the industry is also swept up in this wave of anti-racism or critical race theory, or whatever you want to call it. It's after the death of George Floyd in the United States. And again, it's an election year, and Donald Trump, very, very divisive president. And on the left, he's like the most racist, Hitlerian racist Nazi ever. And, this whole movement to quote unquote defund the police. So you have these cultural movements that are happening, and the theater industry says, and weirdly enough, I'm noticing as well, like, our union, again, Actors Equity Association, is becoming a much more activistic sort of organization. It's like, no, just make sure that we can get a good salary and some health weeks. Thank you. That's all I really ask of you. I don't need to be I don't need to be sent emails about racial justice, every freaking day. So you have all that to say, you have this industry now that's swept up in this idea of diversity and equity and inclusion and racial justice, and reaching out for these oppressed and marginalized minority groups, and how it's a white supremacist, capitalist industry, which is absurd to me, because I'm like, okay, you 23-year-old twit. You weren't complaining when you were, drawing a $3,000 a week salary working in the chorus line on Beetlejuice on Broadway, asshole. But now you're still complaining about this profit-driven system. I have news for you that is Broadway. Broadway is the commercial sector of the theater. Now,
you need patrons to come and pay $100 for their tickets, or you're not going to get your salary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, because they have no idea how it works, there's a reason tickets are so prohibitively expensive, but people still pay them, and that's why you can you can be chorus line member number 17 and still be drawing a $2,400 a week minimum. And so you have all these cultural forces that are combining, and it's so dedicated to more diversity and to more diverse audiences or whatever. But at the same time, they're instituting these vaccine mandates and vaccine passports, which are discriminate or disproportionately discriminating against poor working minority groups, excluding Asians, obviously, who are one of the most, I think they're more highly vaccinated than their white counterparts. So at a time while they're trying to increase diversity, they're enacting these policies that are going to reduce diversity. And there simply aren't enough, when you focus more on Broadway, there aren't enough wealthy, affluent, educated, white, quote unquote, progressives or liberals or whatever, who consume theater, and are of a certain age bracket, honestly, as well. There aren't enough of those people to sustain, these long open-ended runs on Broadway. And what I'm beginning to see is that even shows like Lion King, for instance, or Wicked, which are they've been hits for a long time. These are shows that normally
they're just money machines for
right. So the top tier shows on Broadway are shows like Hamilton, Wicked, Lion King. Chicago's in a different kind of category too, but it costs like nothing to produce, but it still brings in the international audiences, but these shows typically gross over $1 million per week in the before times anyway. And now, even shows like Lion King are kind of, they're heavily discounting tickets and they're struggling. You have some shows that are closing prematurely. They're halting their runs. And I'm thinking to myself, this can't go on forever. And as an investor or a producer, putting on a Broadway show is already so incredibly expensive and it's so incredibly risky, and very few shows actually make it, much less turn a profit. And you're creating an environment now where the state can come in and say, you have to shut your show down, or where the people within the industry, the Broadway League, or again, our unions are making these stipulations where, the producers have to pay for testing. And if you have to sit out for a few weeks, they still have to pay you, full time because you're quarantining. And I'm thinking to myself, how can you people not see that in the long run, it's going to be, Broadway is still going to be there, but there's going to be fewer shows. There's going to be shorter runs, more truncated runs. That means there's going to be less jobs for us. And it's funny because I got this email, probably late 2020 or so. And it was from some stupid actor who was complaining that producers were thinking of lowering the number of shows from 8 shows a week to 6, which means that it will reduce their pay. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe the producers are smarter than you dumbasses, and they're reading the tea leaves and saying, well, we're going to be playing to reduced capacity houses, and we're not going to be making as much money. So we're going to have to cut corners somewhere. They can't see the forest for the trees. And to them, talking about money, talking about profit or whatever, it's sort of taboo. But at the same time, again, they don't mind cashing these 4-figure, 5-figure checks that when they're getting paid. But they don't understand the implications and the consequences of what they're supporting.
And presumably one of the implications is also that as not only will the shows, there'll be fewer shows and they'll run for less time, but presumably the wage checks are going to have to go down because the number of patrons is going to, not only are you excluding people through the mandate policy, but you're also, and some people are still very scared even to go and sit in a theatre, even if they think the mask is working for them. And so that must mean that paychecks are going to down. And that must be, already I'm imagining that Broadway is a kind of generally pretty much a profession for the liberal classes. But is this not going to have a very severe impact on the kind of class-based nature of theatre going into the future?
So I mentioned to you before about how I did a show off Broadway. It was the Good Person of Szechuan, Brecht play, and somehow, some way, we assembled this ragtag team of performers and a very, very sharp and smart director, wonderful music team, and we made this work accessible to broader audiences, people who frequent homeless shelters, high school kids, and of course, once we transferred the play to a more prestigious off-Broadway theater, then that audience was like, impress me. But the point is that, we can make this work accessible to everybody. Theater should be for everybody. And yet we're making it for just this affluent left-wing sort of glitterati. And it's just, how can you not see what you were doing in the long term? You want more engagement from the very people that you're excluding, and you have these vaccine requirements and vaccine passports that they exclude not only large swaths of your domestic audience, just in the city proper, but also the United States and also your foreign tourist market. It's completely antithetical to anything that you would think in terms of running a successful theater business, and it kind of leads me to this idea that I'm not sure that I trust any longer people who have allowed themselves to be led so astray, and also people who see that something is wrong but don't say anything about it. How am I supposed to trust these people again? I don't think they're any longer fit for purpose to preserve the culture. And I would speak to people who, I remember this one phone conversation I had, a very prominent director, successful Broadway director. I'm chatting with him over the phone, and he was talking about, of course he has an apartment in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, one of the most expensive places to live. He's done well for himself, obviously. And he's talking about, I've had to significantly reduce the size of my life, but I've just been waiting. I can't wait to share, with some more art with the world, and just waiting and waiting and waiting. And this idea of like, well, why are, we can't wait forever. We can't do this forever. I think that we're going to, but people's eyes would kind of glaze over when I would say, I think we need to be worried about the sort of damage we're doing to people's, to just theater culture in general, the sort of ingrained habit of people coming to see the theater, which was already kind of, I think, sort of on life support. And you mentioned, Toby, this idea that people are so afraid. You have to understand that New Yorkers, and maybe it's similar in London, they've been subjected to nearly 2 years of nonstop fear porn. And it's not just, Andrew Cuomo or watching the news. It's you go out on the streets of Manhattan, you see arrows on the sidewalk telling you what direction to walk in. You see circles on the sidewalk telling you where to stand to maintain social distancing. You have these little small shops where, they only allow maybe 1 or 2 people inside at a time, even in the dead of winter. To preserve social distancing. There's, you see buses drive by with advertisements about wearing your mask correctly or getting vaccinated. You're on the subway platforms. You're seeing more posters of the same thing. You're on the subway cars. You see more posters of the same thing, or these announcements, over the loudspeaker in multiple languages, urging you to, keep your distance and to wear your mask properly and to go get your vaccine. So there's this constant inundation of these reminders of, there's a deadly pandemic going on. And if you veer even slightly from what you're being told to do, you're going to kill people or you're going to die yourself. So New Yorkers are terrified right now. And that's another aspect of this, is like people don't even want to come to the theater. I've had actors who said, I don't want to perform for unvaccinated audience members. You have people who say, I think we should wear masks forever, on the subway and other places. People who want to wear masks in the audience forever. And, Jordan Peterson, just the other day, this controversial public thinker, complained in a tweet about how he went to the Lyric Theater, one of Broadway's oldest theaters, and he was hectored by ushers to keep his mask on and wear it properly. You see these images emerge of ushers, holding up signs that say "mask up, please." So I call them COVID cops. So and this goes on top of the protocols that were released by Actors Equity Association for health and safety. They banned backstage visits. You can't do stage door anymore. So if you have friends to come and see your shows, they maybe come to see your Broadway debut, they can't celebrate with you backstage. Fan service now is like a thing of the past because you can't sign autographs at stage door anymore. Everything that they're doing is completely in violation of the relationship between actor and audience. I have a friend now who's working on a show in another state right now who talks about the strange dystopian sort of reality of performing for a masked audience. It's because now there is a barrier between the energy that's transmitted from performer to the stage and vice versa. You can't read your audience. Their reactions are muffled and stifled. You have no idea whether or not, I mean, especially if you're doing comedy, you need that kind of immediate response, and if it's sort of muted or you can't really tell, like, how are you supposed to read and engage with the audience who is really the fourth, sort of participant in whatever it is you're doing?
It is, as you say. I mean, theatre is a collective enterprise, isn't it, between audience and actors, and so yeah, if and that's creating a barrier, and of course, one of the things which comes out from what you're saying is, in a way, the COVID protocols have taken over the role of theatre from the theatre, which, as we know, is what's happened. Yeah,
the COVID protocols are the theatre now.
They are the theatre. If it's any consolation or source of optimism, I've been to a few shows in London in the last 6 or 7 weeks or so, and things are a bit different here. The houses are not. Some of them are full, some of them not quite so full, but there's quite a large audience going, and I would say that the policing of what people are doing, especially since January the 26th, when we moved out of Plan B restrictions in the UK, has ended. Before January the 26th, there was still policing, and most people were going along with what has happened, but people have moved away from that. In fact, I went to a show on a Saturday, and it was about half and half, I would say, masks, and so the sense of this muted audience, which I suppose is what you're just talking about there in a way, and the impact that has on theatre is ebbing, and so it can, I suppose, from that it can happen. But I mean, I'm sure some listeners would be listening to us discuss this and thinking, but we're not discussing the fundamental question of the importance of protecting people from serious illness and disease from COVID, because we're just talking about the impact this is having on theatre. But that, I think, raises for me one of the most fundamental things. I think we've been discussing this in some ways as well, Clifton, but it's this idea that the arts are somehow not essential. And it seems to be something which, in a way, from what you're saying, theatre actors, producers and so on, effectively have agreed to believing in, even if it's only as a charade. And that's got to be, for me, that's a very worrying sign in a society, because we know that, we all, life and health, of course, are fundamental, but emotional health, there are many, many scientific studies which show, of course, how important emotional health is to physical health. And so we can't simply pretend that this isn't part of something which is actually essential to our societies. And I suppose the question would be, how do you think we've got to a point where this is even questioned in public debate, or even that's seen as the consensus view?
Well, first of all, to go back a little bit, this idea of health and wellness. As I said before, I was very much early on the the COVID is doom train, and I know there are people out there who they are actively denying even the existence of a virus. That is not my intention. I want for people to protect themselves in whatever way they can, whether that's taking an injection or whether it's improving. I mean, I push all the time, lifestyle improvements, health, wellness, physical fitness, proper nutrition, de-stressing your life, nourishing positive relationships, just improve. Like, it could have been a huge cultural moment to say these are the things that are leading to. I mean, because we know what more of what the comorbidities of this disease are,
right? And
yet those aren't really being emphasized. So, I mean, there are multiple avenues of protection, including these medical products, which we are calling vaccines. So, however you best protect yourself, I think it's up to you, and it's up to your responsibility. But going back to the crux of your question, I think part of the issue is that, at least in America, the arts aren't really seen as essential at all. But what I found very strange is that the artists themselves don't seem to think that they are essential. And on top of that, it's so strange to me because the people that I've seen who've been more prominent in terms of their support for the preservation of the arts and the dangers that these kinds of protocols, these long-term protracted protocols, will produce, have been more conservative or libertarian leaning people. I think maybe, you know, and again, another credit to your countrymen, but Andrew Lloyd Webber was one of the only people I saw, one of the only prominent people I saw who said, we have to reopen theaters. We have to do shows. We have, like, the show must go on, you know, which is oddly enough now passé, according to Actors Equity Association. You know, so where are these people, these lions of the theater who are saying, like, no, we're not going to let the threat of this virus. I mean, you know, viruses wane. The strength of them wanes. We learn how to treat them. We learn how to live with them. How can you be so short-sighted about these things? But it's been the biggest question for me. And again, I go back to this idea that I don't think these people are really fit for purpose. I don't know how I can trust people who allowed themselves, who have such low self-esteem in themselves as artists. And I'm saying this is somebody who, I mean, I had a teacher once who told me I could use some more arrogance. You know, and again, I'm not like this hardcore theater kid, but I do take pride in what I do, and I do think that, you know, that what we do has an impact on people, and you know, I haven't really used this kind of terminology before, but it is food for the soul. There is nothing that can really have an impact on you the way that, you know, like the climactic moments, and, you know, like Nessun Dorma or something. You know, I mean, I know it's not the theater, but, you know, we're talking about the opera or classical music, but, you know, there's, and British conservative Roger Scruton, I think, really hit on this kind of thing, this sort of beauty and transcendence. The arts allow you to transcend yourself. They allow you to transcend the mundanity of your everyday normal life in a way that nothing else really can. And, you know, it's akin to a religious experience for some people, but, you know, or even if it's a film, you know, I referenced a movie called Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which is, you know, the sort of romantic comedy from over a decade ago. But it got me through a really, really horrible breakup. I watched it over and over and over again. And that helped me heal. That's the thing. It helped me heal.
It's the emotional catharsis.
So
it's the emotional catharsis, isn't it? That is offered, and is offered fundamentally by a live experience. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? I mean, you know, this mediation through computers. And I guess, you know, Broadway, I know, for example, the New York Met Opera House went down the route of live streaming, and I'm sure some Broadway theaters probably did too. But it's not the same catharsis. Well, it's not the same immediacy. It's not the same relationship, of course, between performer and audience. I mean, all of these things.
There's something magical, I think, about coming into a space and having this experience with a bunch of strangers in a dark room, and you're seeing this thing transpire in front of you, and being moved by it and drawn in by it, and like, what's going to happen? And oh my gosh, and wow, that was amazing. And, you know, you talk to people afterward about it, and you know, there's just something about it. And I feel like if you're erecting all of these barriers to that, including the fear. The fear is one of the biggest things about it. You know, that's why I have some measure of compassion, because, you know, these people were where I was the first few months of 2020. But at the same time, I think that the broader discussion has to be about, like, look, are we going to allow ourselves to be beaten back by fear, or are we going to rise above all of this and learn, you know, and learn what we have always done as human beings, is to persevere and push through, and to keep striving. You know, I mean, we've had plagues in the past. This is not a plague, obviously, contrary to popular opinion, unfortunately. But you know, have we no pride in what we do? Do we not care anymore? And it's weird, because now I hear actors who are saying that they're afraid about job security in an industry where job security was already sort of you know, an anomaly. And I'm like, well, you've painted yourselves into this corner now. You've done this to yourself by continuing to comply with these kinds of rules. So you set a precedent now where going forward, this kind of thing can happen at any time. You know, so I think that's
why I have some compassion as well. And, you know, I feel, because of course, you know, if you're an actor, you know, to decide you're going to train to be an actor is itself an exemplary way to try and live without fear, because as you discussed at the outset of our discussion, it's not an easy profession. You're going to have difficult times, and you may really struggle in it. So it's and then suddenly everybody started living way down with this fear, as you've been describing. So I think that's such a strange place from the outside, from somebody who's never worked in theatre, but from the outside, it seems like a strange place to end up in. So I guess it seems to me also that fundamentally thinking about what, how we get out of this now, it has become, as we're going into 2022, it has to be also an emotional question, really, fundamentally, and how people can have some kind of catharsis which will allow them to lose that fear.
I really don't know how they turn the ship around at this point. Outside of, there will have to be a major shift in messaging. I think what's beginning to happen right now, you're seeing it a little bit at a time. I mean, it's just very strange because, as you mentioned before, I see, in Western Europe, parts of Western Europe, countries are beginning to ease their restrictions. And, and again, at the same time, you see in cities like New York, they're still going ahead with, putting masks on children, and they're not scrapping any of the vaccine passports. And you're talking about people who have continued to deny the existence of states like Georgia, which is where I am right now, where there have been way, way, way more loose restrictions, and yet there has not been a correspondent like deluge of death, Or they'll talk about Florida, for instance, which has had I think a far more effective response to the disease, and yet they've convinced themselves that not only is Florida this huge bastion of just mass of death, and there's mass graves everywhere, but they've convinced themselves that Ron DeSantis, Florida's governor, is hiding bodies somewhere or fudging numbers, even though that's exactly what Andrew Cuomo was doing, even though he was celebrated as his nursing home order. I know something similar happened to the care homes in the United Kingdom. His nursing home orders led to the needless deaths of over 10,000 people. These numbers were used to scare the crap out of people. And Cuomo, not to rant on him too much, but there was leaked audio of him on a phone call where he said, he knew these measures were fear-driven measures, that they weren't nuanced at all. And, nothing phases these people. So when I say I don't know how we'll get out of this, it's because there's all these stories out, there's all this information out there which says hey guys, we can go back to normal and you'll be okay. They don't care about that. I think part of it goes back to the political polarization, because oddly enough, it's become a strangely political issue where, there are people now who say, I don't want to not wear a mask when I go to the grocery store, or even, when I'm out hiking on a trail by myself on some mountain, because I don't want people to think that I'm a Republican. The level of ideological possession and just rot is so deep that I don't know how to come out of it. But at the same time, there are some Democrat Party leaders in the states who are beginning to timidly say, we need to pull back on these restrictions. And what's really cynical about it is that I think it's because their internal polling numbers are so atrociously bad that they're seeing, we have another election upcoming.
You have midterms
in
coming.
The States, our midterm elections. And I'm pretty confident that the Democrats are going to lose control of both the House and the Senate, which will render President Joe Biden completely, even more, essentially a lame duck president, as inept as he already is. And I think they're terrified of the political ramifications. So I'm wondering, come November, if people will begin to see, wait a minute, this was driven more by politics than anything else. And then, we just had the Super Bowl the other day here in the United States. And all this imagery coming out now of these celebrities walking around without masks on. And people say, well, to be fair, they had a vaccine requirement. But yet, okay, there are other places in the United States that also have vaccine requirements, but they're still required to wear masks. and their kids are being forced to wear masks in school, even though the teachers are going to be vaccinated, and children are at minuscule risk from the virus. So,
it's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, I suppose it makes me think, it is hard to see how you pull back from it. But I suppose my question, part of my thought was maybe some of the answer has got to come from creative people's attempt to draw out a catharsis from people, which can help them to get beyond the fear. And, clearly that's still very difficult when the theatre is as damaged as it has been.
Well, here's part of the problem, Toby, is because right now, and I've mentioned this to other actor friends, and I see the light bulb go off because they didn't realize it because they're in the bubble. Part of the problem right now is that in the arts in general, or I should say the performing arts, the audience is no longer of primary concern. Right now, the primary concern is appeasement of peers and maintaining, like I said before, your reputation among your peers. So you have to have the right opinions, the right level of virtue. You don't want to be seen to be on the wrong side of the tracks. And you also have this media machine which paints certain positions. I mean, there was an absurd story. I don't know if you saw it going around, but did you see it about how the term freedom has become co-opted by alt-right or far-right groups now? Yeah. And so people they're internalizing this garbage about concepts of freedom or liberty, civil rights even, and in some aspects, being these sort of toxic right-wing talking points. And this is what happens when you're inside the sort of closed network and you don't expose yourself to any other ideas. So what's beginning to happen, though, on a positive note, is that people like me, who just, I wish I were different, but I cannot shut up about this stuff. I have to say something about it. But I'm slowly but surely collecting people who are like-minded. And now we're having conversations now about the kind of work that we're going to produce. And the great thing about that is that, sure, if you're in New York City or the city formerly known as New York, or if you're in Los Angeles or whatever, or you're in whatever art scene in whatever stupid deep blue metropolitan area that you're in, that's your audience and that's all you care about. But people like me are saying, wait a minute, my audience now is potentially the rest of the planet. And so I think that that's the glimmer of hope, is that more heterodox thinking or independent minded, courageous people, because I was always trained, right, at my fancy conservatory, that part of being an artist is you have to make bold choices and live
without fear, like we were saying. Yeah.
And it's you have to have courage to do what we do. But I see so many people who lack it now, who call themselves artists. And but the good thing is that there are people out there. And what's also great is that, again, I've been so heartened by the response that I've gotten from conservatives, from actual liberals, from libertarians who've said, we want to support what you do. We're going to come see you and your work. And even my Shakespeare videos on my YouTube channel, they say we want more of this. So there is an audience out there who wants to receive what it is that we artists have to offer. It's just on us to organize and accumulate the resources to be able to bring what it is that we do to more people. And I think that's the sort of if we get out of this, they might be in it for a long time, but we might be able to forge a pathway out.
Well, look, I think we should end on that positive note, because we need some positive notes. And I think, I'm sure it's interesting you're saying, you can't shut up about it. As you know, I can't shut up about it. I think that's one of the things which, one of the reasons we get along, Clifton, is because we both, in a way, we just took the decision we cared more about speaking as we see it, truth to power, than the opinions of peers who we've worked with for a long time, obviously, and we hope we can bring them along too in the long term. But it's been great. Thanks for talking with us, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners would like to thank you too.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Toby. It's always a pleasure talking to you.